Could one meticulously timed strike dismantle what Russia once called its impenetrable shield? On the evening of September 28, 2025 at 6:34 p.m., every radar console from Bryansk to Kursk flickered red warning of an attack unfolding across 3 western border oblasts. Operators thought they were witnessing another routine drone incursion, but this was different. In the span of mere minutes, the air defense network that Moscow had spent years and billions building was about to be overwhelmed by a deception of breathtaking scale. As 2 M142 HIMARS batteries positioned north of Kharkiv took aim, hundreds of low and medium altitude signals began moving into Russian airspace. They were UJ-26 Babur AR and Shila 400 drones, long-range kamikaze models carrying 30 to 50 kilogram warheads. Anti-aircraft crews reacted instantly. Missiles streaked into the night, filling the sky with exploding trails. In control centers, cheers erupted each time a target disappeared from radar. To those watching, it looked like total victory. But in truth, every intercepted drone brought Ukraine closer to its real objective. Western analysts from Defense News and BBC Monitoring later described this as a textbook example of false mass targeting, a method designed to saturate sensors and deplete ammunition. The Russians, confident in their systems, unknowingly fell into a layered trap. While attention focused upward, Ukrainian planners were already coordinating a second unseen dimension of the Operation Orbital Data Synchronization from US-supplied satellites and NATO's ISR Intelligence Surveillance Reconnaissance Network. Feeding live telemetry into Ukrainian command screens. At that very moment, deep inside Belgorod, 6 new tracks suddenly appeared on Russian radar. They weren't drones, but M31 GMLRS rockets, diving almost vertically from the upper atmosphere. Panic swept the room. Officers scrambled to power up the S-400 missile system, Russia's prized asset. Within seconds, interceptor missiles roared skyward at Mach 6, detonating brilliantly above the clouds. When the echoes faded, operators announced all targets destroyed. Celebration followed a brief illusion of mastery over chaos. Yet hundreds of kilometers away, in an underground Ukrainian bunker, officers exchanged knowing glances. This victory was the confirmation they had waited for. The feint had succeeded. The hidden S-400 had revealed its position and electronic signature. According to Reuters military correspondents, this was part of a wider pattern seen throughout mid-2025. Ukraine's growing mastery of multi-domain deception, blending cyber intrusion, radar spoofing, and AI-assisted targeting. Western officials quietly admitted that NATO reconnaissance aircraft flying over the Black Sea had likely contributed early warning data, though no alliance member publicly claimed involvement. The illusion of Russian control had lasted only minutes. Beneath the surface, calm Ukraine's planners had already cued the next phase, a precision strike designed not just to wound, but to paralyze an entire region's military and industrial core. What happens when a nation's greatest defense asset becomes its greatest vulnerability? Was the first HIMARS salvo truly a failure, or the most expensive bait in modern warfare? As the smoke cleared above Belgorod, Ukrainian commanders were already smiling underground. They had not lost a battle. They had opened the door to one of the most successful deception operations in the 21st century. Each of those 6 M31 GMLRS rockets, worth roughly $170,000 apiece, had been programmed not to destroy, but to provoke. Their flight paths were deliberately plotted to mimic a real strike, forcing the hidden S-400 Triumph system to reveal its radar frequency location and unique electronic fingerprint. The moment those radars activated, Ukraine's electronic warfare teams captured everything from pulse repetition intervals to uplink codes. Within seconds, those coordinates were shared with NATO reconnaissance networks orbiting above Eastern Europe. According to BBC defense analyst Jonathan Beale, the operation was a masterclass in combined intelligence, an attack built less on firepower and more on psychological and electronic warfare. Ukrainian engineers at the Khmelnytskyi Command Center later confirmed that AI-assisted decryption algorithms trained on data from prior Russian launches allowed near-instant signal identification. In essence, the S-400's invisibility cloak had been digitally stripped away. The Russian operators, meanwhile, believed they had triumphed. Video feeds from Belgorod's Air Command showed officers shaking hands, congratulating each other for shooting down all targets. "We've neutralized the threat," one was heard saying. But while they celebrated, Ukraine's second HIMARS battery, positioned in a wooded area south of Sumy, received the green light, target confirmed. Fire at will. It was at this moment that Western intelligence aircraft, most likely U.S. Air Force RQ-4 Global Hawks, tightened their surveillance over Belgorod. Defense News later reported that these unarmed drones operating from NATO airspace provided live imaging of the region's heat signatures. They did not participate directly, but their data relayed via encrypted links would have given Kyiv's strike planners near real-time insight into the S-400's reaction window. Then came the silent phase. As Ukrainian technicians synchronized timing across different systems, they unleashed UJ-26 Bober drones at low altitude, flying only meters above treetops, approaching from multiple vectors. Their purpose was singular: to occupy Russia's close-range defenses, Panzer S-1 and Tor M2, keeping them busy while the main blow prepared to descend. What followed was described by Al Jazeera's military desk as a layered storm where every noise disguised a deeper silence. The S-400, having just fired moments earlier, entered its recalibration cycle, a narrow blind period lasting seconds, but deadly in war. Ukrainian radar engineers knew this weakness well. They had studied it since 2023 using captured fragments from downed systems. When the second-order confirmed target Belgorodskaya Tets was given, Ukraine's gunners already understood they were about to hit not just infrastructure, but a symbol. That power plant was more than an energy hub. It powered command centers, air defense nodes, and industrial logistics for the entire Belgorod region. Western experts compared this to a chess sacrifice. Ukraine willingly gave up pieces, drones, rockets, and time to expose the enemy's queen. By forcing the S-400 to play its hand, Kyiv turned Russia's strongest defense into a fatal weakness. As the final coordinates locked in and the second salvo prepared to fire, one Ukrainian officer whispered, "We don't attack their walls. We make them collapse on themselves." But how could 6 rockets change the fate of an entire region? Could 6 guided rockets and a few hundred drones shut down an entire region and blind an army's eyes in under a minute? At 1847, on September 28, 2025, the second HIMARS salvo closed the loop that Ukraine's planners had spent weeks engineering. 6 M31 GMLRS warheads, each guided to within meters, fell on the Belgorodskaya thermal plant's main transformer and adjacent switchgear, triggering a catastrophic cascade of electrical failure that plunged cities and military nodes into darkness. Viewer question after the hook: did you expect modern war to be decided by transformers and copper wiring rather than tanks and artillery? The impact was immediate and surgical. The 90-kilogram single-piece warheads fragmented heavy copper bus bars and collapsed insulation blocks. Giant arcs leapt across blown substations and snapped transmission lines as transformers disintegrated under the thermal shock. The result was not just a single localized explosion, but an uncontrolled chain reaction across the grid. Redundant feeders failed, circuit breakers welded shut, and an entire distribution node went offline, taking down radars, command shelters, railway signaling, and industrial control systems in one synchronized blackout. Open-source satellite imagery and civilian videos later corroborated the sequence: fiery blasts, then a thermal signature collapse consistent with transformer destruction, followed by widespread outages across Belgorod city and surrounding towns. Reuters carried visual clips and on-the-ground reporting confirming large fires and grid collapse the night after the strike. The military logic behind the strike was strategic and economical. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War and independent defense commentators framed the attack as targeting a system of systems, rather than simple infrastructure deprive air defense radars of reliable power, degrade encrypted communications, and freeze the railway nodes that deliver fuel ammunition and maintenance parts to frontline formations. In other words, the strike aimed to convert a handful of precision munitions into operational paralysis for an entire theater. Civilian life unraveled in real time. Water pumps stopped hospital backup relays, strained traffic signals went dark, and tens of thousands were left without heat or mobile connectivity as emergency services scrambled. Local officials initially tried to attribute the outage to a technical failure. Within hours, satellite data and eyewitness footage made clear it was a targeted strike. The governor's public admission of widespread outages punctured official claims of total defensive success. From a strategic perspective, the strike forced a costly dilemma on Moscow. To protect domestic population centers and critical infrastructure, high-value S-400 and Panzer batteries had to be shifted from forward sectors to rear oblasts, an operational rebalancing that relieved pressure on Ukrainian frontline units and opened temporary corridors of relative vulnerability. Western defense analysts note this exact trade-off: expendable local assets versus strategic depth, a choice that under sustained precision strikes favors the attacker with superior targeting and intelligence. President Donald Trump's administration, according to anonymous Western briefings published in the press, continued to underscore NATO's role in intelligence sharing and ISR support. Publicly limited, privately substantial helping. Kyiv refined timing and target acquisition windows for such complex multi-domain operations. Analysts say that partnership blurred traditional boundaries between tactical strikes and strategic effects. As the smoke settled over Belgorod and thousands scrambled in the dark, one hard question remained. Had this one night reshaped the calculus of supply movement and morale across an entire front? Or had it only opened the next deadlier chapter? Could a single surgical hit on a transformer choke off an army's supply lines and turn logistics into chaos? Within minutes of the Belgorodskaya TETs being struck, what began as a local power outage cascaded into a regional systemic failure: rail signals, dying maintenance shops, freezing, and long-distance supply trains grinding to a halt. Local officials reported sprawling blackouts and immediate disruption to essential services. Reuters corroborated that the governor of Belgorod confirmed significant power outages after missile strikes that same night. Viewer question: after the hook, did you realize the backbone of modern armies is often electricity and signaling rather than just fuel and steel? The physics of the damage were simple but brutal. When the main transformer and switchgear fail, redundant circuits are overloaded and protective systems trip. Electrified rail sections lose traction, and crucially signal and point control systems revert to fail-safe stops. Trains full of fuel ammunition and spare parts can't move until human operators clear blockages manually, a slow, dangerous process in wartime. Open-source satellite imagery and on-the-ground reporting showed fire and thermal anomalies at the plant, followed by progressive outages across the oblast, matching the pattern of a targeted strike rather than an accidental failure. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War and other Western think tanks framed the result as operational paralysis by severing the energy inputs to radars, encrypted comms hubs, and logistic nodes. Ukraine didn't just black out a city, it temporarily blinded and deafened an entire theater command. This was not random collateral damage. It was a deliberate attempt to convert a handful of precision munitions into outsized operational effects. The immediate human consequences were no less stark. Hospitals struggled to keep critical systems on generator power. Traffic lights vanished, causing gridlock. Water pumps and heating systems suffered, creating a cascade of civilian hardship that Russian local authorities scrambled to manage. Russian media and officials initially attempted to downplay the scale. Eyewitness videos and independent verification forced a more candid acknowledgement from regional authorities. Strategically, the strike forced Moscow into a painful trade-off. High-value S-400 and Panzer batteries that had sheltered forward operations suddenly had to be considered for rear area defense lest additional strikes replicate the Belgorod effect. Pulling those assets back relieves pressure at the rear, but weakens frontline air defense, an operational rebalancing that Western analysts say tilts the risk-reward calculus toward Ukraine when Kyiv can sustain accurate timed hits. As ISW and other observers noted, this kind of pressure compounds over weeks, fewer air defense sorties at the front, longer windows for drone and missile teams, and incremental erosion of Russian operational tempo. The role of NATO and the United States loomed in the background. Anonymous briefings and reporting in Western outlets indicated that ISR sharing satellite imagery, high-altitude reconnaissance, and signals intelligence had materially assisted Kyiv's timing and target selection, though alliance members avoided public attribution. The Trump administration, now leading NATO policy, publicly stressed support for Ukraine's right to self-defense, while privately maintaining tight operational controls on intelligence flows, an arrangement that critics argue both enables Kyiv's effectiveness and risks escalation if mischaracterized. If an outage can halt a train full of shells for days, what does that do to frontline morale and the calculus of commanders who suddenly must choose between defending cities or sustaining offensives? Did a single precision operation force a full strategic rethink in Moscow and a hard choice inside NATO's war room? Within days of the Belgorod blackout, senior Russian commanders faced an unpleasant arithmetic: defend domestic infrastructure or maintain hardened layers of air defense forward of the line. The decision would not only reassign assets on the map, it would change how NATO, the United States, and Kyiv measured risk and opportunity across the theater. Viewer question after the hook: if you were advising Allied capitals, would you push for more overt ISR support or keep backing covertly to avoid escalation? Operationally, the strike produced immediate painful trade-offs. S-400 and Panzer units that once guarded supply hubs and ammunition depots along the front were suddenly retasked to shield cities and energy nodes in Belgorod and Kursk. That redeployment relieved pressure on some Ukrainian units at the front and created windows during which drone teams and long-range fires could operate with greater freedom. Western defense analysts framed this as a classic attrition by denial strategy. Ukraine forces the opponent to spend resources defending an expanding perimeter until the defender's depth erodes. Beyond hardware, the psychological and political dimensions were blunt. Russian domestic authorities were forced into damage control narratives as blackouts amplified social strain, cash shortages, healthcare stress, and clogged logistics hubs. The Kremlin's messaging about invulnerability and deterrent power suffered a credibility hit. That political cost mattered strategically because it constrained Moscow's freedom to escalate indiscriminately without domestic blowback. Western commentators from the New York Times and BBC highlighted how visible infrastructure strikes can shift public tolerance for offensive operations and influence battlefield morale. For NATO and Washington, the Belgorod operation raised thorny questions about the line between tactical assistance and strategic compellence. Anonymous briefings indicated that NATO provided ISR, including satellite tasking and high-altitude reconnaissance, materially improved Kyiv's targeting fidelity. Yet alliance members remained careful to avoid public attribution. The Trump administration, now leading U.S. policy, rhetorically insisted on Ukraine's right to self-defense, while privately calibrating how much intelligence and material to authorize, without provoking a broader escalation. U.S. officials told reporters that risk assessments now had to factor in second- and third-order effects, rail paralysis, industrial slowdown, and the political fallout in Russian regions that had been previously considered secure. Military scholars noted a wider strategic ripple, sustained strikes on critical infrastructure, impose long-term economic costs that are not easily reversed. Repairing transformers, hardening grids, and rerouting rail logistics require months and billions, diverting resources from munitions production and forward sustainment. Jane's defense analysts warned that if Ukraine sustained such pressure, Russia could face a progressive erosion of combat logistics, which in turn would force tactical withdrawals or reduced operational tempos in contested sectors. This is the kind of cumulative pressure that reshapes campaign timelines more than any single battlefield victory. Yet the approach is not risk-free. NATO officials warned privately that increasing intelligence cooperation or more visible kinetic support could be framed by Moscow as direct alliance intervention, raising the stakes. The calculus in allied capitals therefore balanced two imperatives: maximize Ukraine's capacity to disrupt Russian rear systems, while minimizing the political optics that might trigger wider involvement. That balancing act now dominates policy meetings in Brussels and Washington. As planners on both sides redraw maps and reallocate scarce assets, the central question remains: can Kyiv sustain a campaign of targeted paralysis long enough to fracture Russian supply systems without prompting the strategic countermeasures that would blunt its effect? Could the autumn night over Belgorod mark the moment warfare truly shifted from attrition to systemic disruption? In the aftermath of the strike, military planners, analysts, and ministries around the world adjusted their mental maps. What Ukraine demonstrated was not simply a successful raid, but a replicable template combined low-cost kamikaze drones, mid-range precision rockets, electronic warfare, and externally sourced ISR to turn critical infrastructure into a battlefield multiplier. Viewer question after the hook: should alliances treat energy and rail nodes as military targets, or are they off-limits even when they supply combat operations? The operation crystallized three analytical frames that Western think tanks now use to read modern campaigns. First, Domino Effect analysis. A single precise hit on a transformer can cascade across rail, signaling industrial production, and command nodes producing outsized operational effects far beyond the initial blast. ISW and Jane's analysts documented how severed signaling strands halted fuel and ammunition trains, a logistic impact measured in days of delay and thousands of tons of material stranded. Second, opportunity cost analysis. Russia must now divert high-value air defenses, repair budgets, and engineering brigades to rear-area recovery assets that otherwise sustained frontline offensives. The economics are stark: billions to harden grids and months to rebuild transformers that, once destroyed, are not quickly replaced. Third, strategic contrast. Analysis: the targets Ukraine chose undercut Moscow's declared doctrine of strategic depth. Rather than confronting Russian forces head-on, Kyiv attacked the connective tissue that lets that doctrine function, exposing a contradiction between Russia's stated defenses and their real vulnerabilities. Western military commentators noted the role of NATO stage ISR and U.S. intelligence in elevating Kyiv's targeting fidelity. The Trump administration's policy balance public caution, paired with discrete intelligence flows, appears to have enabled Kyiv to time attacks to S-400 recalibration windows, while maintaining plausible deniability for partners. Defense News and the NYT quoted unnamed officials who argued that this model of calibrated support maximizes Kyiv's effect while minimizing overt alliance entanglement. But the approach has clear limits and risks. Moscow can harden, adopt decentralization, or launch punitive counterstrikes that raise civilian tolls, moves that force Kyiv and its backers to weigh moral and political costs. If NATO escalates visibly, Kremlin messaging could reframe the conflict as a direct confrontation, with the alliance narrowing political space in Western capitals. Yet if Kyiv sustains pressure without provoking a catastrophic reaction, the cumulative effect may be decisive, a reworked front where logistics, not just firepower, determines momentum. As analysts update wargaming scenarios and allied capitals argue over the optics of intelligence sharing, one persistent question hangs in the air: who will win the race between hardening and disruption?